Hello, and welcome to another Friday Conversation with Experts. My name is Mara Koffmann, and I am the founder and CEO of Braintrust. We are a platform where parents can connect with certified teachers and learning specialists for private tutoring support. And today I am here with Heidi Martin, an educator based in Wisconsin, and we are going to be talking all about orthographic mapping. So I'm going to pass it over to her so she can introduce herself, and then we will dive right into it.
Yes, thank you, Mara. My name is Heidi, and I have taught first grade for 9 years. And I'm currently teaching virtual at a virtual school, first and second grade. And I love to share all things science of reading as I learn them. So I'm very thankful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So I found we are Instagram buddies, Heidi and I, and she did some wonderful posts on orthographic mapping. And I thought that her explanations and illustrations provided a really great visual and tool for understanding this really important learning strategy for kids. So to start, Heidi, can you tell us a little bit about what orthographic mapping is?
Sure. So like most teachers, and especially first grade teachers, sight words are life. I mean, that is just life. We are sight words here, sight words there, word wall, with sight words. And I even had one of those fist bump, they fist bump and say the word when you come in the room and when you leave the room. Just immersing them in what we call sight words so that they memorize them, because what I always thought was that a sight word was a word that you have to know by sight. You can't sound it out, and that's why we call it sight words. Right. Well, that's wrong. And so I learned that that is wrong. A sight word is a word that you do know by sight. Adults have 30 to 70,000 sight words in their memory. And so what orthographic mapping really refers to is a different way of learning these words versus memorization. So studies have found that memorization is not effective or efficient, and that phoneme graphing mapping is. So really what we're doing when we're talking about orthographic mapping is phoneme grapheme mapping, and then what happens in our brains and how our brains store that information, that's orthographic mapping. So phoneme grapheme mapping, that's always so hard to say, is just that sound to letter correspondence. And then doing learning words this way takes far less repetitions, and it's stored permanently in our what we call orthographic lexicon or memory forever. And so, when I first found this, to me, I always say it's like magic, but it's science. But when sight words are your life, and this is how you've taught for all these years, and then you find out there's a better way that's actually faster and that actually works, you just want to share it with the world. So that's why once I learned all of this, I just want to continue to learn more about it and share it with as many people as I can. It really does work.
Yes, absolutely. And so what is it? Can you give us an example of kind of like what it looks like to orthographically map a word, and thinking of what sight word instruction looks like? Lots of times we just think of saying, the, THE spells the, and then you have kids repeat it a million times. And yes, they'll see it a million times in reading, but orthographic mapping really takes it one step further to try and give kids some kind of a more meaningful anchor to help them really have a strategy beyond simple memorization for being able to recall and remember these words. So can you give us an example of like what it looks like in terms of an instructional sequence of how you would teach a child to orthographically map a word?
Definitely. And yes, when you have those kids, who know the word one day and then they forget it the next day, it's really because they really never really learned that word. And so it's just not an effective way to do it. So if you are doing phoneme grapheme mapping, what you're really going to do is have the child say the word. So what we talk about with the words like the and said, those are like our irregular sound spellings and our irregular high frequency words. And those are the words we typically call sight words in first grade, right? So if a word like the, you're going to have the child say the word the, and you really want them to say it as many times as they need to, they have to hear that word and they have to hear the sounds in the word. It's learning to read is all about sounds. And so when they say the word the, then you want them to break that up and you want to ask them, how many sounds do you hear in the word the? And so you want them to say, two. I hear two sounds. And then what you do is you write two lines, or you can use sound boxes, and then you're going to spell those sounds. So how do we spell? How can we spell that? And if it's something that you haven't taught yet, a lot of teachers will put a heart over it and say, we have to remember this by heart. I prefer to just teach that at that time, especially the TH digraph, because our kids, especially in kindergarten, they're going to see that everywhere. They just are. And I know a lot of times it's not in line with that scope and sequence. So, I mean, the teacher is, do what works best for you, but I just prefer to teach that because it's just going to come up over and over. And so how do we spell that? And then we put the TH on the first line because that's one sound. And then typically we would spell that with an A, right? But not in the word the. And I kind of make a big deal about it, especially with the littles, because before we used to just sweep that under the rug, like, oh, just ignore that part because it doesn't make sense. Just memorize it, right? Like, because you don't know how to explain it all the time.
Right.
But what I found is talking about it and making that big deal about it really helps them to even remember it even better. Right. And so is going to be spelled with an E, and we're going to put a heart over it because that's the part that we have to remember by heart. And then I have them say the sounds again and then say the whole word together, and then we'll spell it and say the whole word together. And really, typically, after doing that 1 to 4 times, it's permanently stored in your orthographic memory. So way more efficient than having them memorize it. When you're really talking about it and breaking down those sounds, it's based on research and it really does work.
Well, and it helps kids understand that there are all of these words that we call sight words that are seemingly things that they need to memorize. You don't need to remember every single part of it because a lot of it does make sense. And in a word like said, you hear the 3 sounds, s, d, but the first sound is exactly the letter you would expect, and the last sound is exactly the letter you'd expect. And it's just that middle sound or the middle spelling that you really need to remember by heart. And so I love that, it is making that big deal, and it is highlighting the part that is unique about the word or that is surprising about the word, but then empowering kids to use their knowledge of phonics to be able to solve the problem of the parts that are predictable and that do follow the patterns that they know.
Yes, exactly. And I was reading Kilpatrick's book the other day, and he says he doesn't even like them calling them irregularly spelled high frequency words. Let's say a word with an irregular sound spelling, right? Because as you just said, 2 out of the 3 parts are completely regular. It's just that one part. And a lot of teachers will ask me, well, what's the difference between memorizing that part by heart or just memorizing, calling it a sight word? Isn't that well, if you want to call it a sight part, I suppose you could, the heart part just kind of sticks a little bit better. But the key is that it's just that little part of the word. The rest of the word is completely regular, like you said.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of kids, if you're also trying to memorize 4 letters, it's a lot easier to memorize and remember 2 instead of those 4. And if you link those 2 together as the unique part that are related, that's also a little trick or anchor that I think helps it stick much more than trying to remember this sequence of words. And whenever I hear kids trying to remember a sequence of words, it's always sort of like a red flag for let's go back to phonics, because that is the memorization just is not sustainable, right?
Nope. And it takes 5 to 500 repetitions. And I was just talking about this the other day. It's in first grade, it feels like you have 1,000,000 repetitions. But at the end of the day, we have 100+ words that we're teaching. And so they probably didn't get those 500 because you wonder why your kids leave sometimes and they don't know all of those sight words that they're supposed to know. Well, some kids need 500 repetitions and they didn't get it.
Yeah.
So this has just been a game changer. And I mean, it's been around, the science has been around for so long. So, I get frustrated sometimes and I feel that guilt of I didn't know this and I could have helped more kids. But now that I know, that's my goal, is just to share it with as many people because it's just so much more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any sort of specific tricks or strategies or ways you try and make it fun for your students that you use in class that you think that, help to make things as sticky and engaging as possible?
Yeah. So the one part is, those hearts. The hearts really do help if it's an irregularly spelled word, or irregular sound spelling in the word, right? And like for the word said, because it's 2 letters, AI saying at, that's super irregular. So we put a big old heart over it, and we just kind of go all out with it. And then Brittany from Happy Little Hearts on Instagram, I mean, she came up with this amazing idea. So this can be used for so many things, but one of my favorites is using it for phoneme grapheme mapping. And so, we pop the sounds. So if we're doing the word shark, sh, r, k, and we pop those sounds, and then it's also easier for the kids to see how many sounds because they're popping it. And a lot of kids like to play with these fidgets anyways, so why not just incorporate that into the learning? And then I picked up even more fidgets to use. So we have this little sound one, but we'll pull it apart, for sounds. As we say the sounds, how many times did you pull it? Things like that, just to kind of incorporate movements a lot of times. So, okay, we have 3 sounds. Let's stomp out those sounds. Let's clap out those sounds. Let's jump those sounds. Anything like that you can incorporate into this learning is just going to enhance it even more.
Yeah, make it multisensory, make it fun, and it's definitely more likely to stick. And, I know that we talked about the fact that you can use orthographic mapping to learn any word more effectively. And for those parents in particular that might be wondering, well, what's the difference between a sight word that a child learns in first grade and a regular word that they're using? I think it's important to reinforce the point that this is a good strategy for learning any kind of word that a child is trying to master, but that this heart strategy is particularly useful for making those patterns that a child might not have learned yet in terms of their phonics skills more memorable and drawing their attention to those pieces that might be more surprising for a student, but still using that same strategy to map out all of the sounds in a word in order to learn it.
Definitely. So I highly recommend, and I just did a session for my parents of my students on this because I saw students struggling with spelling words because our curriculum does spelling lists. And that's just been such a frustration for parents, is learning these sight words and then the spelling. And it's like, this is what you need. And you can use this with any word. I use this with my son who's in preschool all the time for words. And then the only time you would use that heart is if there's an irregular sound spelling. The rest of the words, I mean, you'll just map out based on their sounds. And then once that word is stored, then we call it a sight word. Yeah. So until then, it's just a word. So it could be a high frequency word. It could be a word with an irregular sound spelling pattern, but until it's stored, then that's when we use that term. But I still say sight words in the way that I used to because I know that's what's so familiar to people, right. So
in the program I was trained in, we learned to call them red words, because a red word is a word that you kind of have to stop and learn differently in the way that you have to master these other sight words, which are the words that you can recognize automatically. And I like that distinction because it kind of highlights the fact that we have to approach some of these words differently, especially when we're teaching early reading skills. So I think it's an important and helpful distinction. Maybe we can slowly but surely change the vocabulary around all of these terms.
That's the goal.
Slowly
Yeah.
but surely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Heidi, for joining us and talking to us about this really important strategy for helping kids to build automaticity as readers and build confidence as spellers. Orthographic mapping, we can't say more. And I'll turn this into a blog post. You can visit our blog at braintrusttutors.com and see this video and view some examples of how to orthographically map words as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It was great. And I hope this can help, parents or teachers who are struggling to teach those words and have this new strategy. And they'll find, I've just gotten so much feedback from teachers and parents who are using it on the magic, magic that happens when kids learn words this way. So
science of reading,
so much.
magical thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mara. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.